Welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome everyone here today for today's art forum. My name is Meg Keating. I'm the head of the School of Creative Arts and Media, and this is the second art forum for this semester, and it's a great honour to be able to be here today and introduce you to our very special guest speaker. Tina Baum is from the Gulin-Mirrigin, Waterman and Karijari peoples of the Northern Territory and Western Australia, with Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, Scottish and German heritage. She has 30 years experience working in museums and galleries throughout Australia and is the current curator of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island art at the National Gallery of Australia. Tina has a passion for learning and sharing First Peoples cultural knowledge and representation through arts, culture, histories, and indigenising voices, perspectives, and truth-telling. Her focus and passion is to indigenise best practice methodologies through appropriate cultural care, identification, documentation, and community engagement and co-management of Indigenous collections by asserting traditional language, cultural authority and agency within museums and galleries. And Tina's going to be speaking about how the NGV has done this and why they are doing that through her latest exhibition, Ever Present First Peoples Art of Australia. But to formally welcome Tina, we have Denise Robinson, who's the School of Creative Arts and Media's Indigenous Creative Fellow. So over to you, Denise. Lovely to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meg, and hi, everybody. Just before I start the welcome, I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank and acknowledge Neil Haddon for driving the Art Forum program and Meg for supporting it, and my fellow teammate, Matt, and all presenters that we're looking forward to seeing throughout the semester, and the generosity that they give in agreeing to present, and acknowledging that by us attending, that is actually us respecting and appreciating that generosity. So thank you guys for being here. Secondly, I just wanted to give a little plug to the Theatre Royal's presentation of the visitors. If you have not got a ticket and you have got opportunity to see the visitors, I just wanted to say I attended that performance last night at the invitation of my peer colleague, Asher Warren, who dragged me out on a very chilly Tuesday night, and I am so grateful he did. It's a very powerful performance, thought-provoking and insightful. So if you have got an opportunity, I'd just like to give that a plug. And I wanted to give a warm shout out to Studio Practice 312B that are sitting up there at Inverest. And thank you guys for being here. Look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. So Tina, it is an absolute deep honour and privilege to be able to welcome you here today. I wish to acknowledge that I am not standing here alone, that Auntie Lola Greeno, esteemed Elder Shell Stringer, and the School of Creative Arts and Media's Honorary Doctorate Fellow is also here with me. She was going to be here in person. Due to family unwellness, she had to pull out at the last minute. So she did text me this morning, "Dear Denise, I wish I was there, and please welcome Tina warmly, Auntie Lola." Mm-hmm. So it is in that spirit that I stand here today to extend this welcome to you. And I extend the welcome from the country of Lutruwita, the home of the Palawa/Pakana. I especially acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Moanina people who cared for, lived on and lived with this land, this country, for thousands and tens of thousands of years, passing on their knowledge, their wisdoms and their care for generations. The Moanina people did not survive colonisation, and as contemporary Palawa/Pakana people, we take it upon ourselves to ensure that we continue that legacy. We live on, we live with, and we care for these lands, this country, daily, in honour of their spirit. And it is in that spirit that I welcome you. I honour you, your family, your community, your country. And I thank you for being here today. I wish to also acknowledge the great work, the sharing, the generosity, the grace, and the deep integrity that you bring to your work across our nation, working with many Aboriginal people and changing the space that we all work in. Both you and I stand on the shoulders of others. I know that we carry that and acknowledge that. I also wish to acknowledge that you now have others standing on your shoulders. You lead the way for many young Aboriginal people to grow and to aspire to be the next generation of voice, and I thank you for that. In thanking you for your presentation today and your generosity, I extend as tradition this offer from our community, from Maker, Auntie Jeanette James, who also extends her warm welcome and her regards. She's gallivanting around the world at the moment, so she can't be here, but she extends her warm regards and sorry that she can't be here today. So on behalf of my community, all of our elders that we acknowledge daily and that we respect, I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, beautiful. Wow. Wow, how do I continue? Thank you so much. Is that doing it? Yes. Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much, Denise, for that incredibly warm welcome. I am so honoured to be here and to share, what we've all been, those of us that work in these spaces, what we aspire to do and to change. So thank you so much. I'll just clear all of these. I also pay my respects to your ancestors, elders, leaders, activists, family, community and artists past and present, and feel very welcome here in Nipaluna. I acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists, colleagues, friends and guests here today, and I recognise each of our unceded country, our communities, cultures and histories, and I also recognise those stolen individuals and those families, and all First Nations peoples who are on an ongoing journey to reconnect and revive what was taken from them. As announced, I'm Tina. I'm originally from Gurrumilla in Darwin, and I look forward to sharing with you at least my journey. It's been a long journey in working in museums and galleries, and how over the certainly in the last number of years, I and many others have been trying to make some meaningful changes. This is a tough journey that we can sometimes make, and it's never an easy road when you work in major white institutions, as I do at the moment. It certainly has its challenges as a First Nations person, and particularly when you learn about museums collecting strategies, the historical ways and means of collecting First Nations or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, their culture, and all elements of who we are. Being the curator or working in the arts and culture was not my first career choice. When I started in 1988, the bicentenary year, what an incredible year that was. It really opened my eyes, coming from Darwin down south, as I called it, for the first time for university, where I studied a Bachelor of Applied Science, Cultural Heritage Management, specialising in museum studies. It was the first museum studies course of its kind, dedicated particularly in targeting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples at the University of Canberra. It was such a pivotal moment in my career trajectory. I knew that I wanted to work in arts and heritage, I knew that I wanted to work in heritage and culture, which included the arts and reconnecting communities with their cultural collections, particularly in institutions. After starting out in the National Museum of Australia as a fresh student, I then went on to the Queensland Museum, the Museum and Art Gallery, the NT, on my homelands, and then the opportunities where they arise came to work on the exhibitions for the newly built National Museum of Australia. Of course, 19 and a half years later at the National Gallery of Australia, I've seen so much throughout that time. And when I started in 1991, particularly in my career, there were just a handful on one hand that you could count of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people working in any institution in this country. It was a pretty incredible moment to be working in that space, and it's where I learned the fundamentals of working within these spaces. My pathway into museums and galleries was by sheer chance, and I'm really grateful. It's an area that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. I, of course, followed all of the ICOM, regulations and rules of how and what museums do, and the methodologies that were enforced in each of the institutions that I worked at, even in the Museum and Art Gallery, the NT, where it's really quite a rich First Nations community there. Throughout that time, I never challenged anything, never questioned, because it's just the way that it was. And often being the only Aboriginal person in the institution and at a junior role, you never really felt you had the voice to do that, to make a change. You'd often question, you'd think things through in your head and you'd talk to colleagues, but you'd never really actively made a change in these spaces. However, there are a couple of moments in my career which enabled me to have a voice and to make a change. Of course, I wanted to give a sense of, here we go, of how rich this country is. As many people know, they may be familiar with this map. That is the Horton map that the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies has, and you can still get today. This is an indicative one. It's not a true and realistic, real boundaries for communities, but it gives people a really good sense of how many communities there were, and sadly how many are gone today. Of course, this is an incredible work by Daniel Boyd, and how what I love about working in the arts is how artists can tell these stories, can tell stories that sometimes workers in these institutions don't have the agency to be able to do. So, artists can do that for you, and looking at how we can do that truth telling through them. My passion heading down, as I say, indigenising, not decolonising, because I want to start from our perspective and not have to be reductive with colonisation. So indigenising journey and opportunities came about more recently, and 2019 was certainly one of those years. Let me just get this, hang on. I don't know how to do this again. It started with a number of key moments within arts, culture and museums sector. At the time, there were just these and they may have gone under the radar for mainstream Australia, but there were some key moments, I think, that really were turning points. Not only for me personally, in 2009, I had the opportunity to go to the Pitt Rivers Museum, where I, under the Accelerate program with the British Council, where I had the opportunity to see some of my Larrakia cultural objects. And what struck me, and I sent the workers away and I just said, just give me time and space, is that from what I understood, I was the first Larrakia person to have seen, touched and been in the presence of these cultural works in over 100 years since they were taken off country. It was a really powerful and special moment for me, and really made me, I suppose, my interest in the overseas collections was really heightened at that time. We have a lot of collections, of course, within Australia in institutions, private collections, and likewise, a lot of the old material, the ancestral material, is overseas. And so, looking at, and it's not just, as we all know, the cultural materials, it's our ancestors as well, ancestral remains, but also the archives, photographs, everything that was collected on and about us as we were deemed to be dying out. So it was really an important moment to engage in those spaces. This particular basket is one that I'm actively, it takes me a while, but I'm actively buying back my Larrakia cultural material. They're not always gifted back, and if I can help it, and I negotiate with private collectors, it was in a private collection, 20th century basket of our community that I am buying back. We have a Larrakia Cultural Centre that is opening sometime soon, and we really need to not just show the contemporary materials, but that old material where we possibly can. So when I went to the Pitt Rivers, they didn't have a great deal, but they had some really small, beautiful works, which, enabled me to engage at a deeper level. And I'm really glad that I had the confidence at the time to just shoo the stuff away, just to give me a moment, because it wasn't part of their practice. I don't know if he was watching through a window on the side or not, but, leaving cultural materials with individuals, and I wasn't a researcher at that time, wasn't really the done practice. Again, this is another cultural object and armband that I have acquired, and so I'm scouring those websites and places to get back what we can of our materials, so that they're not in institutional hands where there's a lot of regulations and rules around accessing them. I'll leave this one there for the moment. So in 2015 and I think it was all in 2015, but the National Museum of Australia had an exhibition called Encounters, which is a secondary part to Indigenous Australia's exhibition held at the British Museum. Encounters, of course, had many of the works from Australia in the exhibition, and they were brought to Canberra. What was interesting to me is that, this particular, going too fast there. This particular work that was in the exhibition and in the British Museum's collections is and has been documented, or was documented, as being highly likely to be the shield that was dropped after I don't like the word encounters because it seems so passive, but a violent interaction with Cook and his crew, where two Guigal men encountered them, dropped their shields after shots were fired, and Cook allegedly collected these particular works. Rodney Kelly, a Guigal man, came to Canberra and saw the shields, and after the show made a claim for them, rightfully so. It is well documented that they were just collected. They weren't collected with permission or with any exchange at all. And so I found it very interesting at that time. There was a lot of investigations, and of course Australian laws were changed because of that. With the seizure laws were changed. But I found it really interesting that this particular shield, the narrative and the provenance behind the work was then investigated, and it was changed. It was likely to have not been the shield that Cook was talking about. and a lot of investigation occurred into this particular work. For me, that was a turning point in what I was doing with our collections at the gallery, because when you really think about with institutions, they have the power and authority to tell the story, and they have the power and authority to change it. They have the power and authority to then determine who doesn't have access to it and can make claims against it. So this horrified me. There was, of course, the Stuff the British Stole podcast, which had me screaming in the car. My poor husband was just like, what's going on? It was frustrating to me because this is, the investigation interrogation, as far as I could see, was based on a Western methodology. It did not, consider, Aboriginal ways of being and doing. And so this particular shield really made me think about what I'd done in my previous career, in my previous life in museums, and what other works and objects had passed under the radar or had changed. Next, in 2017, there was a fantastic, I don't know if Dr. Zoe Rimmer's here or not. 2017, there was an opportunity to hear the stories behind a touring show that Dr. Zoe Rimmer, who at the time was with TMAG, she was the curator of Kanawaricha, an unbroken string exhibition of Tasmanian Aboriginal shell necklaces that was held at the National Museum. It all seems to be at that place, I don't know, where it was really enlightening to hear how the community had come together and done this exhibition, and it's an area that we in institutions had been struggling with for so long. How we label the unknown makers and artists. How it's not right. They were known. I struggled for years to find a way. I saw NGV had looked at one of the labels previously was, once known. It's like, oh, that's still not quite right. Institutions are looking at, pinpointing it a bit more that it's a Larrakia maker as such, and which is fantastic as well. But in the exhibition with Zoe, that Zoe had curated, they had changed all of the unknown artists or unknown makers to ancestor. And that made absolute sense. And I know it was very fitting for her ancestors and her communities for that particular exhibition, but it really resonated across the board for all of those that worked in institutions. And it was a fantastic starting point and a way of rechanging that narrative of who, not only the collecting practices of the early days, where names and details were barely, if not, they didn't even bother collecting, that we could now reattribute and at least pinpoint that these makers were someone's ancestor. We couldn't use the word elder so much because we didn't know if they were an elder or not, but an ancestor certainly fitted that that moment. I've got on here, this is another key moment in 2017 where the Chowchak wing at the University of Sydney were developing their exhibitions for the new space. They have these incredible Larrakia works in their collections, which I'd never seen before, and again, was able to engage with and work with the curators, on the exhibition. There's moments where they, of course, they don't have an interest or time to engage with every single work in a level that community members would. And when I did I just spent hours and hours and hours with these works. This is the handled end of a spear thrower, where the fine details on the works were not even seen by the other staff. And it was just wonderful to be able to engage and to handle or to touch these works again. And work with the university collections staff on it. So, looking at how we were, of course, in with my mother's Larrakia community, we're reviving our language. And so talking to them about, well, no, this is an English word, spear thrower. We do have a cultural name for that. Would they like that? Not even would they. It's like, here they are. And to educate the audiences about the original name for these particular works. So there's moments where you think, gosh, we can change these things. We can indigenize what we're doing in these spaces. So 2019 for me, though, was the pivotal year. It was the big year. Not only did I turn 50 and I turned from outward looking to inward and not giving two hoots about anything anymore. It's like a switch went off. It was fabulous. My colleagues at the institution, we also, maybe that's what the kind of, what happened after that, because I just started not necessarily growling, but challenging everything that we were doing at the gallery. So the first thing I said was, or talking with and working with my non-Indigenous colleagues in the curatorial and education areas, was that they needed to come to my space where I was currently at that point. And at that point, we'd been doing several, we run a leadership program for Indigenous arts workers, and every year as part of that program, we run a decolonising and racial literacy program that Genevieve Greaves, Warren White Woman, runs, and it's incredible. I highly recommend it if you ever get to do it. As I said, I certainly indigenise and not decolonise, but it gives you some really good practical steps on how to rethink what you're doing. So for my colleagues, non-Indigenous colleagues who don't, that being an Indigenous person, that's not their space. You know, they are in a different space and they don't understand or get where we necessarily come from. So when we were developing the new Australian art galleries, I'd look at these, and sorry, I don't know my colonial artists so much, but looking at these colonial artists, said, I don't see the artist, I don't see the artwork. I read into it. Whose country is it? Where are the people? I look at it from a very different lens. And so coming to the development of those exhibitions was very different for me than it was for my colleagues. So we went through this decolonising and racial literacy program, and it was a real eye-opener. It was great for them. And a real eye-opener to see that they actually need to come to the party a bit more sort of prepared, and so that we not are the ones that have to bear that cultural load and labour in preparing everybody else to come to our particular spaces. So that was a really pivotal moment, because then we were developing these new exhibitions, as I said, and so the Belonging exhibition that we opened in 2019 was wonderful to be able to do. There's still a little ways to go, I believe, in these institutions in how we represent Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, stories, cultural representations. But it was a fantastic start, and it really threw a lot of the audiences off. We got a few feedbacks at that point, but for me, it was a matter of audiences getting used to it. And I think collectively across the nation, so many First Nations arts workers, artists working in these spaces were also making that change. So collectively, there was this kind of groundswell that was happening. It was also the year that I spent 12 months stepping out of curatorial, working in registration, cataloguing works for this show and for many various reasons. I was just getting a bit frustrated in the curatorial space where we weren't able to do, as an Indigenous woman, I wasn't able to do what I really wanted to do. So I thought, I'll step back, I'll just engage with the collections and communities and go from there. And it was during that time that I actually noticed so many stupid anomalies with previous practices within institutions. And that included things like naming conventions for artists. You know, we have incredible artists, and they were, and I've changed it in the systems, you know, people were called descriptors, really. Deaf Tommy, Mungatopi, Lofty, Bardi Old Najameri, because he was tall and Tommy was deaf. And I'm like, we don't call Mike Parr one-arm Mike Parr, do we? So it's really racist and inappropriate ways of referring to these artists, whether they were nicknames or not. You know, I just found them quite offensive and never really noticed until I spent that time really deep, you know, spending that concentrated time working in the collection. So I, as a way of bringing the institution and staff on board, I got approval from above the directorate and all to make a whole lot of changes across the board, from where, you know, say for example, works were called, they were descriptors, bark painting, 3 barramundi and 2 kangaroo. It's like, that's not how it would have been called or have been named. You know, if I was being taught, my whole methodology behind what I do is, if I was being taught by an elder or by a community, what would I need to do? How would I refer to these works? How would I treat them? How would I handle them? All of those, you know, methods is what I kind of try to bring. And if I don't know, I ask and find out. So there's a lot of things that within institutions where, you know, as again, it was just how it was done. That's just the names that were given. It's like, well, let's change them. Although I did admit we were challenging our curatorial colleagues and trying to suggest changes to some of these colonial paintings names, but you know, because our names were just changed willy-nilly and given whatever, you know, titles, we were suggesting some changes to some of these keywords, but that didn't get accepted. That's fine. We'll just refer to them as, you know, Wurundjeri country painting landscape also. But you know, working and engaging in these spaces. Oh, sorry, I should keep moving these images. You know, again, cultural works which many of our communities and young people are reviving and recreating, which is absolutely fantastic. Again, you know, looking at how we can make, all of us can make meaningful change in institutions. We also had an example of a work where it was misattributed. So for me, it's about making artists and artworks visible. Often if they didn't have photographs in the database, they weren't seen. And because for time reasons or for whatever reasons, people weren't going out and actually seeing the work in person to see if it was suitable to use in exhibitions or whatnot. So during that 12 months, I managed to photograph front, back, sides, document everything on 500 small barks, and it was an incredible project. And so artists like this, where they were mislabeled in the database as Gunwingu Marawonga. Gunwingu is his people's and Marawonga is his surname, so there's no such person, but they were in the database as such. And so knowing the style of this artist, you can immediately tell that that's one of his works. And so working with community and the institution, again, there's a whole process to change that and make sure that that is correct. I updated and made those changes. So stylistically, you can see that there's similarities. Again, you know, bit by bit, making these changes, naming conventions, all sorts. I developed an extreme, probably extreme is the right word for it, passion for working with collection databases. Everything about the work stems or is collected into this one space. When I started, we were writing in collection ledgers and with paper cards. Now, of course, it's all on the database, and the database holds all the critical information that people refer to. So whether it's generating labels, whether it's, you know, generating, you know, notes, whatever it is, care handling, references to it, the database is so important and can unfortunately also be easily changed if mistakes are made. You know, spelling conventions aren't followed, all sorts of things can happen. So I've banned so many people from touching our collections records if I can help it, because I really want to ensure that we have agency over what information is inputted and generated, or at least check with me on it. The ensuring that that community know about these works, because we didn't have photographs before. A lot of this information and these works were hidden, so it was really important to be able to highlight this. Another element which I've been, as artists, I am informing artists about their cultural, or not only their ISIP rights, their ways of doing and being is valued and can be imported into everything that we do at the galleries. This is just with the National Gallery. So Alec Tapodi is a young, he'd love me saying young Torres Strait Islander artist who is very deeply working in a very strong cultural space. He makes, and he has done a lot of research in museums and institutions, of course, with those 19th century Torres Strait masks that have been taken overseas, particularly in Cambridge with the Haddon collection there. He is a cultural man, and this started in the undisclosed National Indigenous Art Triennial in 2012 when he was featured. He started enforcing cultural requirements on these works that he made, that men only handled them, because traditionally and culturally men only would have handled these particular types of works, regardless of whether it's made out of fiberglass, metal, steel, whatever it is that he creates his works in. He is and we have embedded it back into everything that we do at the gallery. So I have been able to negotiate, of course, with him, because all of our objects conservators are women. But, with gloves, no skin contact, things like that, if we need to. Same with the art handlers. Giving him the opportunity to be able to reinsert that cultural practice into, even though it's an incredible artwork that he'd made, it's a very strong cultural work as well. It's a representation of an old 19th century, his interpretation of an old 19th century mask, and it's just as powerful. So we have all of the warnings, signage, everything in the database that this is a men-only work, and so staff are accept that and work to those practices. So I've since been able to, when I have conversations with artists from the Torres Straits, or even artists from Papua New Guinea, if this is how it was originally or culturally meant to be managed and used, by all means, put it onto the works as conditions of the work. Whether, there's a lot of restricted painting still with papunya boards that are, taken away, and only with community consultation can they be accessed and shown. Likewise, with these incredible artworks, there's no reason why they cannot be held in the same light, which is really, really important. As part of that, as I said, working with the collections database team, it's an absolute love and passion of mine, and just the necessity of getting things right in the database. So, now inserting language, how do we, incorporate, which our system doesn't quite like still, but cultural language font. Yolngu Mata or Ananu fonts, which is what the community are using. So, there's still ways that we need to go with that, where we are doing it manually at the back end once reports are being generated for labels. But the incorporation of labels, I've started doing it where if there's say, for example, language names for mediums, I'll have the cultural word first, then the scientific name, and then the common name, all of it on the label. The more that we as that we get the mainstream audiences familiar with and comfortable with. Although the primary objective is to make communities feel welcome and have that agency, when mainstream audiences get used to it, just like they are with the dual naming of places and the references and the use of language there, which is just awesome. Again, community-led titling, all of these sorts of things which are overlooked so much in institutions, but it's how we represent our communities and artists and stories in exhibitions, in publications, on the website, and we're actively making changes in all of those spaces. We've also deliberately looked at a glossary of terms, words that we will and will not use, unless it's a very specific context. Things like settler. It's like, well, they didn't settle peacefully in these spaces. Looking at, absolutely using the words massacre, slavery, all sorts of words that are part of that truth-telling within these spaces. And if that's what the artist wants to use, then that's what they can use. And we do, have great conversations with artists to say that when you're giving this information and you're providing these stories, tell it how you want to tell it. For some, it's in language with no translation, because many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists, that's their fifth, sixth, seventh language, and it's not always reciprocated, that generosity of understanding what English translations are about for them. So sometimes it's just in language, and if it's inaccessible, it's inaccessible to audiences. But hopefully they get the idea that artists have that agency to be able to do and tell what they want, how they want to. Those, even though I've got it there, decolonising, but those indigenising teachings and ways of asking and listening to your colleagues or other First Nations artists or communities, listening to what they have to say and what they, what their perspectives are. There's so many cultural knowledge holders out in the community still, even when you're working with archives, and private collections. There's great gains to be made when talking with and engaging with communities and giving them agency in these spaces. So, when I work with artists, it's just that, even in my community up in Darwin, it's, listen first, ask questions, and really spend time and engage and meaningfully engage with community and artists. So what have I got here? Yeah, I think for me as a now senior curator, but recent promotion, so lovely to acknowledge that, that we need to make artists visible, their artworks visible. We need to give artists and communities agency and elevate the stories for them to tell it the way that they want to, ensuring that ethical dealings are being done, and there's great gains that have been made in that space, particularly in relation to provenance of works, which we know is quite problematic for a lot of the early collections, but holding auction houses and others accountable to getting that right. It's not my job to find all of that out. Get their checks and balances in place before they, move these cultural works on if they're not to communities. As I've said, to understand the diversity and depth of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander arts and culture will take many, many generations, many lifetimes, and it's a journey that I'm still going on, not only with my community, but all the communities that I deal with. But it takes only a moment to appreciate and to understand. And if we just take that moment to talk, engage, listen, then I think we've got many gains to be made within institutions and collections. And I've got here, you as artists, allies, consumers and collaborators can listen to First Nations people and support and engage with us elevate our stories, our voices, our perspectives, and really give them the opportunity to do things their way. For me, this is, this is just a snapshot of what I do every day, the learnings that I learn every day, and I try and share that with my colleagues and embed it back, because I'm not going to be at the gallery forever, but try and embed those within the institution to, hopefully where they carry that legacy on. But it's an ongoing journey for me, but it's a must for all cultural institutions and organisations, even corporate collections and private collections, to do better, to indigenise and to engage at a more meaningful level. I think I've run over time a little bit, but that's a snapshot at least anyway, so thank you.
Okay, we are going to be out strictly at 1 p.m. I've been given feedback about that, so we will be, which means we have time probably for 2 questions, because I'm sure Tina would like to answer them in depth. Is there a question either online in the chat room or here in the room that anybody would like to ask of Tina? Jan.
Hi, Tina. Thanks so much for that. I'm just interested too. It's increasingly look and write about First Nation practices. If we can't trust the database, how do we then go about finding the right information? Because as you would know, a lot of the cultural centres and Indigenous people are so overwhelmed with this requests for assistance.
Fix the database. Engage with communities in long-term relationships, not just the pop in, pop out, which is what happens all the time. Start small with collections that that are bite-sized, that can be managed, and do research. There's a lot of great content out there by First Nations practitioners, artists, curators. And yes, you don't want to add that cultural loan or labour onto them for it, but there's a lot out there that you can at least start querying and gathering and saying, hey, I found all of this, what do you think? Or, build those relationships, and have those regular moments throughout the year that you gather and say, hey, we've got another batch of works. Can we talk to you about it? And give them that space to be able to come on board at that time. But the database still needs fixing. It still needs to be, if that's where generations, ledgers were, harder to change, but databases, unless there's restrictions on them, they can be changed and, can be quite detrimental to accessing or, making sure that the works are of the appropriate community. I know of examples of where through human error, works were catalogued wrong. These were particularly restricted works that were then sent to a community that were then dealt with, buried, whatever the community wanted. And then afterwards they discovered that they were actually attributed wrong. And it was horrifying for those individuals. So getting it right at that central point is just so critical. But it's a long-term thing that, with engagement and the right processes within the institutions to get it right and to document on this date, this day and this time, this person changed it for this reason after consulting community, blah, blah, blah. So that whole process of change has been documented, and you know why and when and by whom, and you can, if you need to, change it back if it's wrong.
That's brilliant, thanks.
Which is why we need more and more of our mob in these spaces. They're not easy spaces, to work in. They can be quite challenging, but they're quite rewarding when communities can access their collections appropriately. I thought I saw a question pop up. Oh, is that such?
There's a comment from
Yay, Dr. Zoe Rimmer.
Such important work, Tina. Thank you for your passion and persistence in this change. And also there was another comment from Abby Miller. That was absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much for your time, emotional labour and sharing perspective. I feel so grateful for this opportunity to learn. And I'd certainly echo those sentiments myself in terms of learning the profound change that a label can make in an institutional space from unknown to ancestor. It's one word, but it goes a huge way. And I do remember that moment in TMAC, not that long ago, surprisingly, not that long ago, to make such a change. And in such a simple way for an audience. It's fantastic work. Are there any, is there one last question? Again, we're going to be out by one.
Thank you, Tina. Astonishing work. I wonder if you might be able to offer a perspective or reflections on the challenges ahead, particularly regarding things such as digital repatriations, data ownership, sharing of those things. Because I know that that's a bit of a hot button topic in the moment.
It is. There's so much work that needs to be done in that space, and you know, artists and researchers are doing a lot there. Look, there's challenges ahead for us working in institutions. There's people are leaving. There's certainly a lot of frustrations after the massive no vote. Why do we bother? You know, why do we bother? But for me, working in these places, it's like I've got an opportunity to create those platforms and access for people. I've been in places where access has been denied community because institutions can. That digital repatriation is a really interesting and complicated one too. You know, I know that there's some particular institution that how do they deal with the digital repatriation of restricted information and material when they want to share, when it can be so easily copied and shared when you don't need it to. Locking down that kind of information is difficult. But yeah, that whole this is so conference worthy. All of these conversations, particularly for us working in these spaces, the First Nations people in these spaces, and in universities as such as well. That's a bigger answer that I can give in the time frame. But yeah, an important area that we need to continue working in. We have 3 minutes to escape.
Thanks, Tina. Fantastic presentation. I'm interested in the renaming, the terrible racist naming of some of the objects. But I wonder about the consequence of renaming if a researcher is, for example, trying to track back. Are there, also known as ways that you can still follow this, and maybe even notes about the racist naming?
Yeah, that's all captured in the database. If you do your due diligence and you do it right, and if you're quite particular about capturing that, as I am, then you have all of that there, so they can do the keyword searches and find that there's alternative spellings in parties' records, that you can capture all of that, because there's also artists that pass away, their name changes, and so being able to refer to that, even referring to and speaking with communities on how as we've put on labels, artists that have passed away, their names are written in full, but you can't say it. You can read it, but you can't say it, and particularly in the presence of other community members. So there's a lot of these notes that you put into the database that researchers can access, and so long as people do that, I mean, I know that that's a lot more sort of administration, but it's so important. So yeah, hopefully it's done right and it's still accessible.
we will wrap up there. Please join me in thanking Team Baum.